In this video, I'm going to go over some of the potential background behind the Lord's Prayer. We can kind of see some of the clues in this passage that precedes the prayer. Christ says, "When you pray, you shall not be as the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and in the corners of the streets, that they may be seen of men." So right here, he gives us a clue. He tells us how they're praying. And we can ask, was there a standing prayer in Judaism during the time of Christ? If so, then would his disciples have recognized which prayer he was referring to? If we could learn what these people were praying for, it might provide context behind the Lord's Prayer and why he called these people hypocrites. So just before we go on to look into that, notice that he says not be as these religious people. They're doing this prayer to be seen of men. They're not doing it necessarily with the intent and the hope that God will answer the prayer, but rather to establish their own popularity, their own reputation in the eyes of other people. He's telling the disciples that they love to pray standing. So in Matthew, among the people he's with, they would have known what prayer he's talking about, especially when he mentions synagogues. So what is that? Well, there's a prayer called the Amidah, and the Amidah is likely the prayer that he's referring to in this sermon. This prayer was already a few hundred years old and established as part of Jewish worship. It was prayed 3 times a day and is still prayed faithfully 3 times a day by Jews today. Amidah means standing. It is also referred to as the Tiflat, which I'm pronouncing that wrong likely, which means the prayer. Of all the prayers that are part of Jewish worship, this one is often considered the most important, as it sums up the beliefs and hopes of Judaism. So this prayer that I'm going to show you, it was prayed 3 times a day in the time of Christ. It had already been around for a few hundred years. Jewish scholars point to Ezra in his day and 120 scribes or scholars who gathered to kind of formalize Judaism and how they were going to practice things as they came out of Babylonian captivity and returned back to their promised land. So here's some of the petitions of the Amidah on this slide and the next 3 slides. There's 18 petitions total that were formulated, and I'm not going to read through all of this. I'll just point out a few things. You'll notice in petition number 1 that it's directed to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and it mentions right here that in love he will bring a redeemer for their children's children for your name's sake. So they're already, right from the first petition, letting God know that they trust in him to send a redeemer who will bring them back and gather them under his rule and under his kingdom. So keep in mind that in the time of Christ, they were under the reign of the Roman government. Petition 2 talks about reviving the sick, reviving the dead and healing the sick and freeing the captives. Talks about the sick being healed down in number 8. So these are things that Christ, as the Messiah, is among the people doing, and those who follow him, they see Christ fulfilling these petitions that are being prayed 3 times a day by the Jews. But there are other people who they don't see that. And you can see why Christ would have potentially referred to those people the way he does. Here's petitions 9 through 15. You'll notice number 12 I've put in a different color. This petition was added after the destruction of Jerusalem, and it was included because it was basically against the Christians, who Jews considered as heretics. Christians were still going in and praying with the Jews in the synagogues. And so this was included, a lot of people believe, to make the Christians feel uncomfortable taking part in those services and in the prayer. Petition 10 talks about praying that God will raise the banner and rally the exiles and gather his people from the four corners of the earth, which is, an echo of what Isaiah talks about in his book. It also talks about asking God to send the Scion of David, the Messiah, who will come and restore the house of Israel. And then here's the final petitions. Talks about, praying that their eyes will witness the return of the Messiah or Christ to Zion in mercy. Or I guess we might say that, God, he'll accept their offerings and that he will restore, his favor to them as a people in Zion. It closes out in the last petition with asking that God will send the light of his face, which is the priestly blessing found in Numbers. And this prayer, some people believe that it was said by Zechariah when he went in to offer the incense in the temple. And so there is, some evidence that when Gabriel comes and tells Zechariah that he's going to have a son, that it's an answer to this prayer, and in particularly because of what Gabriel says, that it's an answer to this final petition. So hopefully this prayer and this context helps you understand a little bit more of what Christ potentially was doing when he gave the Lord's Prayer. We'll skip over this. So you can kind of see, as I've gone through in the other video, a lot of the petitions that are found in the Amidah are built upon in the Lord's Prayer. But as always, when God works, he simplifies and condenses things and makes it easy for us to understand and adhere to.